Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and in today's video I want to talk about empowerment in more detail in terms of when is it the right time to empower your champions. I feel like with the epic empowerment that we've had recently, it's kind of a hot topic now, and a lot of people will probably be making the decision like, should I be sacrificing faction guardians? Should I +1? Is it worth +2ing? I want to do a bit of a deep dive to kind of explain my approach and how I kind of approach this problem and the decisions that I make. So just to cover what empowerment gives you, it gives you essentially base raw stats with some bonus additional flat stats. The key thing for a legendary and mythical is really the level 2 and the level 4 because we get the speed and these additional crit rate and crit damage stats. And then for an epic, it's slightly different because we get crit damage at level 2 and then a little bit less stats. But we pretty much get 40% of the main base stats and then these accuracy and resistance. So very powerful stats, but it's not always going to be the most powerful across the board. And we also have to take into account blessings. So the first thing you should do is whenever you pull a duplicate champion, you never instantly empower them. You never do that. The first thing you want to make sure you do is you fill your faction guardians. This is priority number 1. You absolutely want to get all of these faction guardians maxed out for, I would suggest, epic and legendary. The main reason why is this is a universal stat across the board. Now, as much as the first two are not that important, and probably the fourth one here, the 30 accuracy and resistance and the 10 speed is worth chasing. These are valuable. And unfortunately, it is a tiered system. So you can't sacrifice all of the dupes except for one just to get the +10, right? It doesn't work like area bonuses or great haul bonuses. If you want the +10, you absolutely have to maintain all the previous bonuses. And +10 speed across any champion in that faction is quite powerful. It is very useful, especially when we get in these very restrictive content pieces. When you're dealing with things like secret rooms in Doom Tower, Cintranos restrictions, and lots of different boss requirements, getting +10 speed and +30 accuracy and +30 resistance is certainly going to be an extremely valuable asset to have. So point 1, always get your faction guardians in line first. Now, sometimes you might come across a problem where you have sort of a +3 scenario. You can see here, if I just take away one of these duplicates here a second so we can see, you can see I got a lot of 3 of the same champions. I've got 3 Islins, I've got 3 Pixnials, 3 Arbiters, I've got 3 Elenarals, and 3 Yannickas. So in this situation, you might be tempted to go, well, I can basically +1 someone, but is +1ing a champion really worth it? Because you've got to take into account the fact that you are essentially burning a duplicate legendary, you're burning a legendary, which is quite hard to get, and you really want to make sure that those stats pay off, because what happens in the future if maybe you need to make a second copy? Arbiter is a classic example here. I've got 2 of them made up into a rank 6. Well, if I had +1 to my Arbiter instantly, would I then have the option to do that? And does that +1 give you enough benefits? Well, I actually don't believe +1ing a champion is very important, because you really just don't get an awful lot for a +1. If we look at a legendary here, we get 10% of our base stats, and then we get 15 accuracy and 15 resistance. Now, these stats are very low. They're effectively just a little bit more than 1 roll per slot, right? So it's about 6 substat slots, which, you know, is good, it's decent. But when we actually look at what that translates to, you'll see that the numbers just don't really make sense. If I was to basically pick someone from the high elf faction, let's say I picked Yannicka here as an example. If I decided I want to +1 Yannicka, well, I'm going to get 10% of 1,000 defense. Well, that's 100 defense. I'm going to get 140, about 150 attack, about 1,500 health. These are not huge numbers when you consider that a simple empowerment of a health is near enough the same thing as burning an entire duplicate champion. So at +1, you're really just not getting an awful lot of sort of payoff, and you're not getting a lot of bang for your buck. So I absolutely would not recommend anyone +1 a mythical or legendary champion. I would always, even if I've got no use for them in a faction guardian, just hold on to them in case something comes up that you need to make a duplicate. Once you start getting more of them, this decision can change, but there's absolutely no value, in my opinion, in +1ing a champion in legendary and mythical. Now, it's a little bit different for epics, mainly because epics are a little bit more accessible. You're more likely to get more of them than you are not, especially if they're void epics, because the pool is quite small. So if you're pulling a lot of void shards in a ×2 void, you're likely to see a lot of the same type of void epics pop up. In that instance, once you finish your Faction Guardian, I would +1. You can see I've actually +1'd quite a lot of my epic champions because there's just really no harm in me getting a little bit of extra stats. We can see here if I take in my 6-star Doom Priest, the empowerment has given me a pretty decent, nice little addition, right? It's given me 1 ascension here or there. It's not amazing. It's not make or breaking that champion, but it is quite nice. Now, the first decision really that I actually then think of is the +2 point of view, because what happens at +2 is you get your first really significant statistic, which is speed. You get 10 speed for legendary and 5 for a epic. And this is when I would suggest any support-based champions, any champions that are not dependent on doing damage, this is much more interesting to +2. People like Ghostborn, people like Lydia, people like Mithrala, those champions that you really want to be getting lots of turns and rotations out of, then I would consider doing a +2 for here. Also your speed boosters, people like Arbiter, Siphi, a +2 is much more valuable because this 10 speed really pays off for the amount of duplicates you have to burn. You're still not getting an awful lot of stats. You're still only getting about 20%. You're getting basically what you get from Arena. You're getting about 25 accuracy and resistance. They're not crazy, but the 10 speed more than makes up for it. But I wouldn't do it for damage dealers because, again, we're not as valued for the damage. I mean, it's kind of changed a little bit in the sense that speed in live arena is much more valuable. But generally speaking, you're still not getting a lot of payoff for 2 of the same nukers. You're getting 20, if it's an attack based, you're getting 20% attack and 10 speed. It's not a significant payoff for 2 legendary or mythical duplicates. So in that instance, again, especially on the mythical tier, I wouldn't burn them. I would hold on to those and, you know, maybe if I wanted to build out a second copy of them. Again, with epics, you're getting 5% crit damage. That is the change here. You're actually getting, for a damage dealer, a little bit more. So I think across the board with epics, absolutely, there is no reason to hesitate. Fill out your faction guardians and then upgrade them. The only thing I would suggest about epics is if you don't want them to necessarily live, this is a seer problem. My seer right now is a god, essentially. It doesn't really die. It doesn't really sort of struggle with anything. It can clear the entire content as much as it wants to because it is 6-star fully awakened with 344% crit damage. So if I take it into Ice Golem, I can kill those waves with like 5 to 10 buffs. But the problem is I want her to actually die. I do not want her to live because the longer she lives in Ice Golem, the more risk we have of killing the minions too soon. So we don't get the HP burn. It slows the whole run down. So if I was to go and +4 my Seer straight away, then I'm not only just getting a little bit of damage stats, I'm gaining a substantial amount more effective HP, 40% more HP, 40% more defense. So I have to really be careful about who I empower. I don't want to necessarily give stats that are useless to my champions. So always keep that in mind. With epics, you can absolutely empower them, but don't do it for very few stats. Effectively, all this gives my Seer is 10 speed and 15% crit damage with 5% crit rate. That's all it's really giving Seer because she doesn't really care about these other stats, right? Yes, you can use it for accuracy. I don't really care about accuracy. I just use my own buffs. It's easier to control. So really you're buying these with very little stats, but as a consequence, I'm getting a lot more effective HP. So from an epic point of view, the key thing to point out is 2 and 4, if you're empowering them, check your speed tunes. You're going to be adding speed to your champion. It could break it and you didn't realize. But otherwise, I think you can absolutely empower for free. Now for the legendaries at +3, we get a bit more of what we had on +1. Again, not desirable. What really makes a difference is +4. This is where damage dealers are now much more interesting because you get the 10% crit rate, which is quite significant when you pair it with the base of 15% and the mastery of 5%. You're getting yourself really close to already like 40 to 50% crit rate before you even put anything in the substats, and 30% crit damage with another 5 speed. So essentially now you're up to 15 speed, 30% crit damage, and 10% crit rate with the 40% primary stat. Now it feels like it's worth all those duplicate legendaries going in the bin for this upgrade because you're making quite significant stat gains here. 30% crit damage is effectively 4.2 or 4.3 substat rolls, which is quite a lot. It's almost 1.5 times the artifact ascension, so it's absolutely worth it at this point. So the main summary I want you to take away from this is you shouldn't sacrifice your faction guardians for the sake of +1ing or +2ing. I would even say I wouldn't sacrifice my faction guardians for +4 unless it was an absolute specifically powerful champion. For example, maybe I absolutely want to use Turvold in Hydra. I've got a 6-star already and I can +4 him, but it will cost me 10 speed. Well, that might be a payoff you're willing to accept because you can invest extremely hard into that one role. Someone like a Jorgid, for example, maybe you want to sacrifice 10 speed because it will give you a +4. Then I think that's fine. But otherwise, I would always prioritize Faction Guardians. For support-based champions, I would absolutely wait until +2. For damage dealers, I would wait till +4. And epics, I think, is fine to empower at any point in time. But just being mindful of those little niche scenarios. Level 2, level 4 for your speed tunes, and making sure that you're not actually empowering stats you don't really want. Making sure that the empowerment actually has an impact on that champion. Now, the only thing I really want to cover just at the end of this video is the impact of blessings versus empowerment because of the percentage versus flat addition. So what I mean by this is all of the blessing stats you get are flat additional stats. They do not scale off your base stat, which is a very important distinction. When I awaken my Fushan to level 2, he's going to get 750 attack. That would be 750 attack whether he's got 2000 base attack, 1500 base attack, or 1000 base attack. That's not what happens with empowerment. Empowerment is based on your base attack. So a +4 on someone like a Jintoro is going to be at 1487. We can find someone with a higher base attack. I think someone like a Ruel. Here you go. Ruel's got 1696 base attack. Well, a 40% empowerment on a 1696, that's quite a lot more than someone on, say, 1000. We're going to get about 678 attack from empowerment when we put it on Ruel. But if we go back to an example with Fushan here, Fushan's only on 1443. So he's going to get quite a lot less. He's going to be at 577. So Ruel is going to get 100 more attack. He's going to get a lot more benefit, but that's not the same for blessings. So in almost all situations, a blessing is more valuable than +4ing a champion. You will get more stats and more power from 6-star awakening and putting a blessing on your champion than empowering. So keep that in mind as well, that a blessing is far more important when it comes to building out your champions. And especially for champions such as Brogni. I know there was a lot of attention back when we were doing cadaver teams to get your Brogni to +4, which is absolutely valuable because you can get more damage. But his base attack is terrible. He's only getting 782 on this base attack, which means from an empowerment, he's getting 300, where his blessing would give him 750 flat. So he's going to get far more value from a blessing than he is going to get from empowerment. The crit damage and crit rate is really what made the +4 really good for Brogni, not the 40%. So just keep that in mind as well when you are empowering them. 40% might sound like a lot, but if they actually have terrible base stats, it won't be a lot. It will be very small stat gains. So there you go, guys. A bit of a breakdown in terms of how should you approach empowerment? How should you use it? When should you empower? When is the right time to do it? Let me know in the comments below. How have you been finding the epic empowerment? Have you been empowering any legendary champions soon? I'm now starting to get into position because I've managed to fill out most of my faction guardians where I can start considering some +2s and +4s. I did kind of break my own rules by +2 in a mash lead, but I was having a bit of a trivial moment and a bit of a crazy moment. And I think I also +2 to Jintoro because I'd already filled my faction guardians and I used him in clan boss. But apart from these two rule breaks, again, you can see my only other +2 is a support based champion, so it does pay off. So I'm now starting to get into the realms where I can start empowering champions. I've got a few duplicates. The worst thing to receive, though, is this third duplicate, because in 9 times out of 10, like in this situation, it's not so bad, but I've just pulled an Islin and a Yannicka. Well, if I wanted to at +2, then I have to break my faction guardian. I can luckily replace it with Islin, but just be mindful that if you pull a third duplicate and they're one of your faction guardians, they kind of just sit there for a while because you can't do anything with them, which is a very disappointing experience. But there you go, guys. Let me know in the comments below, has this changed the way you're going to approach empowerment and how you're getting on with it? Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.